Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
So here are two things that most guys don't talk about openly or honestly. Number one, your sexual performance in bed. And number two, how you truly feel about the size of your dick. Now, when it comes to sexual performance, most guys will brag about their peak performances and then conveniently leave out any details that may call into question their stallion-esque track record. So when you do experience something that you might label as a, quote, performance issue, it can feel like an indictment on your masculinity and self-worth. And it doesn't at all need to be this way. And when it comes to dick size, unless you're hung like a Canadian moose, chances are you've experienced some insecurities about your length, your girth, or your ability to satisfy your partner. Now, after all, most of the exposure that you have to dicks besides your own are in the porn world, where the average dick size is 8 inches and in many cases, oftentimes much bigger than that. This can leave you feeling unnecessarily insecure about what you're bringing to the table. And again, it doesn't need to be this way. One of the other discussions that not enough men are having is about this unquestioned expectation that every sexual interaction absolutely must end in ejaculation. It's something that many guys don't even question, right? And this unconscious belief that every sexual interaction must end in ejaculation may also be limiting the types of sexual experiences that you're having and limiting the realms of pleasure available to you. And we'll unpack that in today's episode. And finally, many of us have drifted into this unconscious habit of reducing the entire universe of possible sexual activity down into this rote ritual of penetration and ejaculation, much to our own detriment, and of course, to the detriment of our partners. Today's discussion is therefore also about broadening your perspective of what new realms of sexual exploration, connection, and pleasure are possible. And for our discussion today, Brian and I are once again joined by Keith Bracci, who's one of the anchors in the Great Man Mastermind, and he appeared recently on episode number 198 called Talkin' Man Stuff with Keith Bracci, and we enjoyed that dynamic so much that we decided to bring Keith back for this conversation around sexual performance, dick size, and withholding ejaculation. And one more thing before we jump into today's episode. You heard me just mention that Keith is one of the anchors in the Great Man Mastermind, as is Brian Stacy. You've heard me reference a number of examples and stories and breakthroughs from men in the mastermind over these past couple of months because, quite frankly, like the work that these guys are doing are so profound and the lessons are so valuable that they've given me permission to share with you guys. And if you have been intrigued about potentially becoming part of the new class of 20 men who are going to be coming together to make inner work and becoming the best version of yourself your number one priority over the next 12 months of your life, then we are currently in the process of having one-on-one discussions with men who are interested in starting when our next class starts in May of 2021. In the show notes, I have my email address listed. It's hello@dominicq.com. That allows you to reach out to me and express your interest in potentially joining that group. We will set up a one-on-one conversation to see if it's the right fit for you. And here's one piece of guidance that I can give to you. If you are intrigued about doing this work with other men, but maybe finding yourself intimidated by the caliber of men that I've talked about in this group, or feel like that it's like such a next level or such an edge for you that it scares you, do not allow this to be the thing that stops you from expressing your interest. There are so many guys who are right on the precipice of breaking through that next level of their lives that sit on the sideline at the very moment that it's time to grab your helmet and get onto the field. So if you have ever been interested in and want to have a meaningful conversation about, is this the next right move for you, then email me at hello@dominicq.com and we'll get you set up for a conversation to explore whether you can be a part and whether it's time for you to be a part of this next group of 20 for the next 12 months of your life. Enjoy today's episode on sexual performance, dick size, and withholding ejaculation with Brian, Keith Bracci, and I. Keith, buddy, welcome back for round number 2 on the Great Man Within podcast.
This is great. Love to be here. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, since the last time that you were on the show, you had an event occur in your life. You ended up coming down with the vid.
Yes, the vid. It was actually a lovely experience. It was, it was fortunately mild. It was like a day of feeling a little achy, but made the most of it by jumping in my sister's RV, driving into the middle of the woods, and just hiking, reading, cooking, jerking off a ton. It was just amazing.
Sounds like paradise. Yeah.
Yeah. You were saying that. Oh, so you're a family man. Obviously, you're married with a couple of kids, and you were talking to some other of your friends who are family guys. And you're like, wait a minute. So you get COVID and you get to go off like in the woods by yourself?
Yeah, right.
Have peace and quiet for a few days?
Yeah, how long COVID too? That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So guys, just so you know, my business is in the coronavirus testing space, and I got to do a little correction here. It's not your fault. This thing's new. Pandemic's new, but it's not called the vid.
Oh.
It's called the Rona.
The Rona.
Excuse me.
Rona?
Yeah, Rona.
Okay,
just Rona.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks
yeah.
for cluing us in.
So, and Keith, you were mentioning what you were doing on your Corona vacation. And I think everybody that tests positive from now on, I'm going to send them a congratulatory note. Like, congratulations. You are now free to go roam the woods, do nothing, and jerk off for at least 2 weeks. Like, when you told me you were doing that, I was like, of course, like, you're the only guy I would know that would say, like, you know what? I'm going to the woods by myself. And I was worried for you. I was like, well, what if the symptoms really kick in when you're in the middle of the woods? Even Becca was worried for you. I'm like, but it's Keith. He's going to come out stronger. Like, sometimes I can't tell if it's steroids or Rona for Keith, but like, he'll be fine. And look at you. Here you are.
Yeah, we were just talking about, like, so Brian, your testing company is called Vahila. And so for these men, these family men who haven't had a break or vacation in a while, we were talking about creating Vahila Island. And now when someone gets diagnosed with the Rona, that you send them to Vahila Island where they can all quarantine together, spend some time just kind of like connecting with nature. It could be another addition to your business model.
Paradise.
Yeah, usually people, when they get a positive, they get really upset by it because they can't go to work then. They can't work, right? But I have a feeling after hearing this podcast, guys are going to come to me and be like, can you give me a positive result? I'm not positive. I feel great, but I want out for 10 days. So just if you could just doctor up the form for me, that'd be great.
Yeah. And I know we're having some fun with this, and we also want to recognize the gravity of the Rona. I mean, they're the men's. Yeah. Obviously, I've lost a few people in my life to coronavirus. One of the men in our mastermind who recovered from the coronavirus for the past 5 months hasn't been able to retain his sense of smell, which is significant. We've talked about that, right? Like when you lose one of your 5 senses, it's responsible for a big part of like the color of life. We talked about this before we started recording also, the book Breath by James Nestor, when he did that experiment for 10 days of only breathing through his mouth and they like basically clipped up his nose. He had no idea how much he relied on his nose and his sense of smell for just enjoying life or tasting food. And he said when the clamp came off, it was like he went from viewing life in black and white to Technicolor. And, the man in our mastermind who doesn't have that sense of smell anymore, he's a big wine connoisseur. He's a foodie. And he can't enjoy those parts as well. So we bring that in here, not to be a buzzkill, sorry guys, but also just wanted to recognize other people who have had significant loss or pain as a result of it. And we wanted to make point of that as well.
Yeah, totally. I was fortunate.
Yeah, this is all very real, right? Keith was fortunate and also just very strong.
Strong like bull.
And it affects people, obviously, that get coronavirus in sometimes horrific ways. But also, it's the loss, Dominic, that we have as a community of not being able to be in person and doing certain things. I know there's a lot of holiday plans that have been derailed because of this, and happily people are doing that in a smart way in some cases. So yeah, this is very serious. And when we can't have fun with it, let's fucking do it.
Yeah, right. I've been quarantined, but with my wife and kids, so I'm still with people that I love and interacting this whole time. But once I got COVID, I was banished to the basement, and I was 100% alone. And it was the first I was really relating to my buddies that, don't have families or in an apartment. And that loneliness kicked in really quick. I mean, it's very impactful to just be in complete isolation like that, while I hear giggling and running upstairs. I'm just downstairs, just like in the dungeon. It was tough.
I bet.
What caused you to say like, hey, I'm hopping in an RV and going to the
exactly
woods?
What I just described, being in my basement, miserable, going, this sucks. Like what's, and I felt great after 2 days of not feeling well. I felt good. So I'm like, I feel good. Can I start thinking Airbnbs? Like, but how do I get there? And, I thought of my sister's RV, and I just thought it was a great opportunity to take advantage of the situation.
Nice.
Great.
Well, guys, today we're here to have one of the conversations that is always a fan favorite, but Brian, you and I haven't talked about it in quite some time. And it's about this topic of sexual performance, right? As men, we tend to wrap a lot of our self-worth up in this conversation around sexual performance. And it was one of our more popular live events that we had done about 2 years ago now at the Discerning Dick, which was our live event series in New York City, where we talked about some of these conversations that most guys don't. And so we thought that we would revisit that conversation and hit some of these topics around how porn affects sexual performance, how men and women may think about sexual performance differently, what happens when a man loses his erection. And I've polled a lot of the women on my Instagram followership just for like their experiences and their perspective, which we'll bring in here. But before we begin any of that, Keith typically has a joke about his dick that never fails to kill. So Keith, I just wanted to let the audience know, how is it that you make your penis 9 inches long?
Fold it in half.
He folds it in half.
That's what we're starting with. Okay.
And it's because when the first time you told me that joke, it was hilarious. And so I tell it in any form I possibly can. And last night we had our mastermind meeting, and in advance of the mastermind, Mark, who was running us through a yoga session, he was like, hey, guys, I want you to show up in like loose fitting clothes and, like be comfortable. And I was like, yeah, but me and Keith only have extra fitted clothes.
Right.
And what did you say?
I was like, yeah, super tight in the legs, but extra roomy in the crotch, right?
Yeah.
Keith, do you have a big dick for real? Is this
solidly medium, I would say.
Solid?
Yeah.
Extra medium.
Got it.
Extra medium, yeah, that's how I would describe it.
Extra medium. Got it. When you said solid, I wasn't sure if we were talking about a hard state or a soft state. Now, Dominic and I have disclosed, and since we're talking about sexual performance, and there's a good chance that Keith's dick becomes our mascot here on the Great Man Within podcast, are you a grower or are you a shower?
I think I'm a shower. Like, I feel good being naked, so that's why I'm solidly medium. I'm confidently medium. But it's not like I'm not impressing anyone, but I'm not embarrassed at the same time,
Got it. This topic of sexual performance popped up on our last, no puns intended, on our last podcast when we were talking about something completely different, but we got on the subject of sex and sexual performance. And I think something you said, Keith, is that you can get hard in an instant.
I'm a boner machine.
It's just a boner machine. So like I've noticed that as I've gotten a little bit older, I'm less of a boner machine. It used to be, I remember in high school, I had drama class first period one year, and at 8:13 every morning, boom, boner. Now in drama class, when you have to go on stage, it's a real problem.
8:13, like it was timed.
Dude, 8:13 on the money every single time. And I made the mistake of telling one of the.
Why would you tell anybody about that?
I know. This is a mistake. I told a woman about this 8:13 boner every day that was in my class because we were like, joking around, ha ha ha. And then she would walk by me every single time at 8:13 and kind of give me a wink. And I'm like, this is not.
Did that help?
Not great. No, it didn't help it at all. Because then she'd get on stage, she'd be doing something, and she would need a partner to help perform on stage. And then I would have to get up there and bring a notepad with me or something to cover up this boner in my pants, or waistband it, which classic move.
Yeah, thank God for waistbands.
So you get multiple boners a day? What's going on there?
Yeah, I'm like probably 15-year-old level still at 45, where like it's, the wind's blowing, any jostling of any kind. If I'm on the subway, if I'm on an airplane taking off, the rumbling, like it's a constant boner management,
Is this something you look forward to, or is it just is it kind of annoying?
Mostly a nuisance. Yeah, I mean, what do I need a boner for in the plane as I'm taking off? That doesn't help anything.
I wish it does not help anything. I wish we had Dr. Amy Killen on right now that could tell Keith all the different tests that you should take to just check out why you have such a boner situation.
And this is really interesting too, Keith. And if we're overstepping like some personal bounds here, but I know also you've talked about how your testosterone levels have been lower in the past. And like you've actually done testosterone treatments, which everything we hear is, well, if you have low T, then like you don't get boners. And that's the real reason why. But like your experience has been the opposite, right?
Yeah, I'm 45 now. I first tested my testosterone when I was 25. And even when I was 25, I was in the like mid 200s. Don't quote me on this. I remember the range was somewhere like 200 to 900 and I was like 280. So I was in the normal range, but way on the low end. And even testing now, 20 years later, I'm still in that same area. And I do testosterone replacement therapy to get me into more like the 500, more mid-range.
Do you still do it? Do you still do testosterone therapy?
I just started maybe like a year ago.
And were you like, and then this boner machine thing was like same before, after?
Yeah, it didn't affect boners at all. But I did notice energy levels and like performance in the gym and stuff heightened.
Which is why this is like so important to have these conversations, because if you just listen to the marketing and media around, hey, if you're having erection issues, that it's like testosterone and there's like a gazillion supplements. And then there's, these treatments that you could go on and potentially be on for life, which is a commitment. It pays to know that it's not like our bodies are much more complex than that. And it's not just that simple always.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely.
One other thing I wanted to bring up here is, and I don't know if we're going to be able to dive into this conversation today, but there are a lot of our listeners who have reached out to me and confided in me about insecurities that they've had about their dick size. There are a lot of men who have smaller than average penises who have reached out and said, this is a source of shame. It's something I have been shamed for. I have had women tell me or ask me the question of, is it in when we started having sex? And like a lack of compassion around that. They have been around other men in the showers, like, for locker rooms or sports or whatever. And guys have teased them. There have been other guys who have like average size, normal size penises. But like the question you just asked, Bri, about, are you a grower or a shower? If you guys aren't familiar with that language, it's basically like in your flaccid state, like, are you someone who like looks big because like your elasticity is whatever it is at its rest, like it looks bigger? Or are you a grower, which means like when you're flaccid, it shrinks quite a bit. And then when you get erect, it's like, whoa, what happened there, buddy?
Right.
It's like a transformer.
Yeah.
Bum, 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 bum.
Have you, at least on some level, wrapped up your sense of self-worth in the size of your dick? Because I can absolutely say that has been a for sure thing for me.
Yeah, especially in those, formidable years, early on. I would say now, like, does it matter? I don't know who besides my wife who will ever even see it. It doesn't matter now, but I think it is forming early on. It was a big part of identity, especially in dating as well. You're showing up with a new girl and there's that, that feeling of, am I going to be impressive or not? So.
What about you, buddy?
Yeah. Yes. 100%. And not just dick size. That was part of it. I was happily, in Keith's terms, solidly average or medium average. What was yours?
Extra medium.
Extra medium.
There it is. I was happy being in the extra medium category. What I was really wrapped up on was around the performance and how hard was I? How fast could I get hard? How long could I last? Like, good in bed meant like pounding a woman. That was and I say it that way because that's what I felt at the time, was like to do it that way. And so I would say a lot of my identity was wrapped up not just in size. I was like, okay, par for the course there, but like the performance was a big thing for me, to the point where I never took like a Viagra or anything like that. I wouldn't have even known how to get access to it. But I did take over the counter sort of things at GNC. Like I took Yohimbe, I took horny goat weed. And before I would go to the bars, I remember in college, I had a can of Altoids mints, and I would put Yohimbe pills in those. And so before I got to the bar, because those also give you energy, I would pop those things. And I remember being accused of like taking drugs by some group. Like, and I was part of the baseball team, so it was kind of a big deal. And I was like, these aren't drugs, they're just boner pills. Leave me alone.
Yohimbe's insane, Keith.
What does it do?
It basically makes you feel like you just had 30 cups of coffee. For me, it didn't do anything for my boners. It fucking stressed me out, is what it did. Heart palpitations.
What's it supposed to do for boners, though? It's supposed to make you last longer or get a boner quicker? Or
blood flow.
Blood flow.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
For the record, I don't recommend it. It does the same thing to me, Dominic, that you described. It made me really anxious, heart racing. It's not a good feeling.
Yeah. Well, since you guys have been so like forthcoming with, so I'm also in the like extra medium category dick size wise. And the thing that came up for me as we're talking about this, I've just been thinking like when I was growing up, probably into my early 20s, I don't think I ever really thought about my dick size. And it became much more of a thing when the proliferation of internet porn started coming out, right? I mean, you have to understand our timeline here because I'm 42 and in college was the first time that like we had high speed internet. You know, I had AOL dial up at home and the only kind of quote porn I could really get was like if women would send me a picture of themselves, right? And it wasn't of them having sex. And most of the other porn I'd seen was like Playboys and stuff like that. Every once in a while, you'd have that one friend who had like a VHS tape where you could see,
right?
But it was so few and far between that I hadn't consumed much porn. So there wasn't a lot like to compare to. So I didn't even really think much about it. I was like you, Keith, like boner machine. So I didn't really think much about like erections. It was always about with a woman, am I going to last long? Then that was the thing that was my primary concern. But the dick size thing really started to come into my headspace as I consumed more and more porn. It's hard not to think about when you see these dudes who have these like big cocks, massive, and the positions that these women go in with them. And I'm like, that could never happen with me because either my dick would break or, you know what I mean? Like you can't bounce that high off of me. Otherwise, like, you know,
or you might just whiff. You might just miss it. All she feels is a little breeze. And you're like, oh, I'm sorry. I missed.
This stuff is kind of real. And the analogy, I think, the bride that you and I talked about when we were at the Discerning Dick events was like the only basis of comparison that most of us have about our sex is watching porn. When I was a kid playing baseball and I loved baseball, I would watch the Yankees and I could see what greatness looked like, you know, with Don Mattingly and like my other favorite players. But I also knew when I compared my 8-year-old self to Timmy down the street, like in the other Timmys in the league, like there was at least a basis of comparison of other skill levels. Like I wasn't always comparing myself to a major league MVP. But when we are watching porn, which is the only comparison that most of us have ever insight to, it can be a really fucking distorted view of what sexual performance looks like.
It's a good point. I mean, the three of us is saying we're extra medium, but based on what? Like, what do we, you know, I've heard the average is 5 inches. You've never seen your buddies erect, so you don't know. So what are we even judging that on? You know, really?
The penis book. One of my mentors, a woman, by the way, bought me the penis book. She was the one who actually gave us the name for Discerning Dick also. And I think it's like 5.6 inches is like the average size penis. They say something like less than 10% of men have like an 8-inch penis or more. I think it's even smaller than that. It's like 5% of men. But when you're watching porn, the average dick is 8 inches.
Would you want like a 8, 9, 10-inch dick? Like, is that something desirable to either of you? Like if I could snap my fingers, boom, you got...
I thought that was extra medium actually. So.
Oh, I see. You son of a bitch.
I feel like extra medium has a pretty good range to it though. No pun intended again. Because I feel like there's like the, what you used to call Coke cans, like the Coke can cock
right.
Or the Anaconda. And that's like when I think about like these big porn stars. Yeah. And then there's like everything else.
Yeah.
You know, like there's like that extra medium and then maybe below 5, I guess. So it's a pretty good range. And also we haven't talked about thickness. I feel like that if we're going to talk about, if this podcast is about dick size and sexual performance, like thickness should be in there too.
Girth. Yeah. I'm a medium girth. I've measured my dick. Let's just get specific here. So I'm a 6-inch dick. We actually had Dr. Amy Killen tell us like where you need to measure. It's not from under the cock. It's from like the top. And Brian and I were like, please tell us it's under.
Sucks.
Please tell us it's under because that's like an extra half an inch, right?
I used to take that ruler and like jam it in as far as I could. You know, just like, yeah, I'm there. I hit it.
Yeah. And girth wise, like it is medium. Like I'm not like a thick dude. And I've had, I would say some insecurity about that, you know, because like I've talked to some of my partners who have had thick dicks. They love it, you know, and it's like, oh, I feel filled up by that guy. And there is a part of me that's like, I can never fill you up in that particular way. So when you ask the question, like, would I want that? There is a part of me that would be like, yes, probably a bigger part of me than not. And I'm actually working through that because like, that's not going to change, right? Like my dick size is not going to change. And I do think that there's some inner work around body acceptance is a massive category, and there's all different parts of our bodies that we can either love or not love. And that's a part of my journey is like fully embracing like what I've been given and loving all of it versus like wishing it were something else.
Right. We were talking about like, where do we get the feedback? And, the most feedback I've gotten is from women. They're the ones that are comparing it better to others than I can, right? But can you rely on that? I mean, they're going to say, well, it's great. What else are they going to say,
Oh, women will tell you some stuff, man.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah. Like I have a lot of conversations with women about this stuff because they know the door is open. And the stuff that comes through my Instagram account, it's bananas, man. Right. Like what women will just be like, here's what I'm thinking. Here's the questions I have. In some cases, some women are very compassionate to their lovers. In other cases, not so much. And this is where, like I've said before, some women have asked their men, like, is your dick in me yet? And can you imagine like how crushing of a blow that is for some guys, like how dispassionate that is for some guys. And now they carry that into every other sexual interaction.
I think for me, Dom, when we started doing a lot of this work together and I started to transition away from this is a performance to this is about connection, my identity around size and performance started to dissipate. And I started to care less about length and girth and pounding and this and that, and more about like, what can this feel like? Like, what can this like be together? And even if that was a one-time partner, it just became about so much more.
Yep.
And I feel like that's a key to unlock this, like, my dick is too small, it's too thin, I can't do this, I can't do that, because all of that is a performance-based language. And there's so much more. I mean, yes, it would suck if somebody said, are you in me yet? For sure. And like, isn't that interesting? What else can this be about? What else can we do? So I think doing the work to accept that body acceptance, as you said, is an important piece of this, and getting curious around like, what else can this be?
Well, to that point, like we have narrowed the entire universe of what sex could be down to this like penetrative act, like dick in vagina, if we're talking about heterosexual relationships, right? I interviewed a woman named Shayna James the other day. For some reason, like you weren't on the invite. Like I think Callie had scheduled it by accident without it. And Shayna James is a coach who has done work with men for the past 15 years, has worked with 1,000 male clients. And she talked about how many of her clients are in their like 40s and 50s, where erections maybe take longer to come by, or like there's more false starts or starts and stops. And she said, for a lot of these guys, it's a moment of reckoning where they really start to look at other ways of being able to enjoy sexually. And she's like, so many men have no idea about the entire landscape of their body and the potential erogenous zones and how much sexual pleasure can be experienced in other parts of your body. But you've only been limiting to it like that, those few square inches around your crotch. And I've been guilty of that. Like, I don't know any other erogenous, maybe like my neck, you kiss my neck, but beyond that, it's like, okay, spend a few seconds on my neck and then let's get down. Like, let's go down to business, right? So if we are only focused on that penetrative act, then when the dick doesn't work, then it can very easily be framed or viewed as a sexual performance issue.
To take this to an extreme, Dom, in college and into my 20s and 30s, I remember being upset if a woman only wanted to give me a blowjob.
Huh.
I was like, that's not the point. The point is the penetrative part.
Right.
Like, let's skip the bullshit here and get down to business. In retrospect, that is such a messed up view.
Yeah.
It's so messed up.
Yeah. And you denied yourself a lot of pleasure, man. I mean, like if someone wanted to go down on you, think of how many dudes out there are like, aren't getting blowjobs and they're like, I hate you, Brian.
Yeah. Take it while you can get it, brother.
So like one of the things that we've talked about here is it's kind of like, why do men think about sex as a performance? In my travels, I find that far fewer women think about sex as a performance than do men, or do they talk about sexual performance in those terms? And when I think about performances, I think about like getting on the sports field. Like, did I catch the pass? Did I score the touchdown? Did I get the game-winning hit? Did I strike out? Or maybe performances on stage. And I wonder why that is brought into the bedroom versus like the mentality of this is an amazing opportunity for connection, right? Like for us to create intimacy and deliver a lot of pleasure to each other. And in the realm of performance, if my dick goes soft, or if I come too quickly, or if I'm doing something that she doesn't like, it becomes an indictment on my identity. when I'm viewing it through in my masculinity, when it's through the lens of performance versus when it's through the lens of connection. These are all like really valuable pieces of information about how I'm feeling and what's not working for me and how she's feeling and what's working or not working for her. So why, guys? Why is performance like this prevailing thing?
It's got to be some kind of deep-seated primal, it's got to go back to the cavemen kind of thing, because I feel like it's a common experience, that we all have. And, even though, consciously, it's not ideal, it's an instinct that we kind of go that way. But one thing I wanted to share I thought was kind of interesting. I had this therapist who shared, that he was like a boner machine for a while. And then when he got older, he was in his 70s, but he's like, somewhere in like, 50s or 60s, it started to take longer for him to get aroused. Usually you'd think that'd be a bad thing, but he was saying how much it enhanced his, sex with his wife, because he was like, picture it, oftentimes it takes women some time to warm up and get ready physically and mentally, and he was always ready to go right out of the gates. And it's kind of intimidating. It's like, all right, slow that thing down, please. And with it slowing down and taking time, there's less focus on that and more focus on touch and kissing and connection and all that foreplay to connect, to give him time to be physically ready for the act. And he said it dramatically enhanced his sex life with his wife, in his 60s, later in life. I always thought that was very interesting,
Yeah. Shayna James brought this up in the episode that we just did with her. She has a podcast called Man Alive. And one of her episode titles, and we talked about this in the show, was an interview with a man whose episode title was called How Impotence Could Save Your Sex Life. And it turns out that this guy had something happen to him where he can no longer get an erection ever. Physically incapable of getting an erection. And can you think about like any worst nightmare? I can't think of a worst, losing your dick or getting, impotent for life. That would scare the fuck out of me. For him and his wife, it forced them to open up all these other realms. It allowed them to look at different speeds like you were talking about. And we've heard from a number of women who've come on the show before who have said the speed with which women reach peak arousal is very different than the speed that men reach peak arousal. So if you're a boner machine like you and your therapist, it's like, 60 seconds or faster. And women have shared with us in many cases, not all, it could be like 25, 30 minutes to hit peak arousal. When you're moving at such like very different speeds, it can create a disconnect in that connection, that intimate process.
Dom, you're asking about performance and like, why are we as guys like that? And I don't think this is rocket science. It's a rare commodity. At least it's a commodity that we think is rare. And if a guy in a group of guys can go out and get that rare commodity that we call sex, they are considered someone that is cool, that is part of the in crew. And then if you can brag about what you did, it's even better. And so this whole performance-based thing, if all of a sudden I was unable to convert or unable to perform, God forbid if that gets out. I mean, I remember I was young. I was a sophomore in high school, and I've told the story a couple of times, but I was about to get my first blowjob, could not get it up. In retrospect, I was so anxious, could not get it up. I was terrified for the next 2 years in high school that was going to come up in hallway at our high school, and like the word was going to get out that like Limp Dick Brian's here.
Yep.
And I was terrified. And so, and this was something that was on my mind every single time I would see that woman in the hallway. And thankfully and luckily that never got out. She was gracious enough to keep that to herself. But I think it's an indictment on who we are and what we are and what we believe ourselves to be as men.
Well, so what you're bringing up here is really important. And it's making me reflect on a book that I read earlier in 2020, which was called Boys and Sex, written by Peggy Orenstein, who had dedicated most of her life to studying girls and sex, like for 25 something years, wrote like a number of very reputable books on that. And then turned her focus to boys because like there's not a lot of focus on boy sexuality and how they learn. She studied basically like teenagers, like junior high up through college. One of the things that she found was at the very formative stages as boys are learning about sex is that sex, more than anything else, is about power, right? And think about this. Like you just said, Bri, the first guy in your group of friends who has sex or who touches the breasts. that guy is a hero, right? Like, and then the more girls that he's able to do that with, the more celebrated he becomes. It becomes a currency for how cool you are, how powerful you are. And then when you share your stories and then like you become funny or even cooler, like these are power currencies that determine your standing in your group of friends. Or like you said, there were some stories in that book, Boys and Sex, where guys didn't do very well. Like they either came too quickly, they didn't get it up, or they did something weird. And then the girls spread the stories about them and ruined them. So very early on, as boys are learning about this stuff, it's not at all about connection. It's all about like, am I cool? Am I like in good graces and social standing with my friends? And then what's my reputation as I walk through the hallways here as, you know, a chump or someone who's like, you know, a stud?
And this is the great lie, right? The great lie is that guys want to have sex and women are trying to hold on to their virginity. If I could go back and give my younger self some advice, I would say, guess what, man? I got great news for you. Women actually want to have sex.
Yeah.
They also have to feel safe to enable that. And so we can flip the script on this and move this away from this paradigm of rare commodity called sex and something I have to get. And my entire focus is first on getting it and then getting it again to, well, what else is left? If it's there and it's available, what's actually important? Where do I want to be? And so that I don't know if I would have received that message at that age. I don't know if I would have believed it, but I do know it to be true now. And the other thing you said about guys and performance, I don't think it's just for guys. I think women also feel this in maybe a slightly different way. And of course, I can't speak from my experience on this one, but I've heard enough stories from women. There's a comedian named Jacqueline Novak. She's got a stand-up bit, about an hour and a half show. It's called Get on Your Knees.
Okay.
And she's a brilliant, brilliant comedian. If you can't laugh at your own dick after this about like how hard and how penetrative it is, and she's like, I don't know. It's like that thing. I mean, even a big one goes all of what, like 8 inches into me? That's like what? Maybe like it takes up maybe 2% of my body mass. Like that's the thing that's penetrating. So she has all these bits that's amazing. But what I found like really interesting about this is she talked about her childhood growing up, about like, should I give a blowjob? Should I not give a blowjob? Am I using my teeth? Am I doing it right? Am I not doing it right? And so now we have like 2 people. It's not just the males, right? We have these 2 people in our heads that can't possibly connect because we're so damn worried about doing it right. And unfortunately, unless somebody tells us, we could go our entire lives doing that. Or maybe we do it our entire lives until we get married and we feel more comfortable.
It's so interesting. I think that highlights something that in many topics, our minds form as teenagers in one way because we're trying to figure stuff out and we have hormones racing and all these kinds of things. And then as we get older, you know, I'm in my 40s now, things change and the view changes only if you revisit it. Look at it through now this adult lens, you know, with the wisdom and life experience and the perspective that you have. But if you don't take that time to revisit it and reorganize how that sits in your brain, you can stay in that childlike mode for the rest of your life and still be concerned about performance and looking cool and getting kudos from your buddies, you know?
Here's a perfect example of that, Keith. One of the guys in our mastermind who has given me permission to share this story has always struggled with when a woman has wanted to take the top position, he loses his erection. It's that particular position. For most of his life, like he's in his mid 40s right now. He beat himself up for it, right? Like there was something wrong with him and he made it about him and his own masculinity, these kinds of things. But when he started to take a look at his younger self, one of the things that he found was like, I don't know, he was maybe like 12 or 13 years old when he walked into his parents' bedroom inadvertently while they were having sex. And mom was on top. As soon as he walked in and they turned and freaked on him, freaked out, shamed him, you know, yelled at him, punished him. I think there was like consequences as a result of it. Seared into his memory was like this moment of woman on top and that panic inside and then the punishment that came after that. And I think it was years before he ended up in a position where he could have sex for the first time. But when that happened, woman gets on top, all of those feelings come back. But as a kid, you're not putting 2 and 2 together. You're not recognizing that that's where it's coming from. It just happens and then creates a story the rest of his life about like there's something wrong with him. Now, 3 decades later, he's on the healing journey and is able to work through that, to communicate with that. 30 fucking years of feeling like there's something wrong with you, man. Like that's why it's so important to have these kinds of conversations.
Inner work, man. You got to do it. Jump in. Otherwise that stuff doesn't change on its own. It takes like digging, thought, analysis, talking about it, considering this, considering that, getting other viewpoints from other men so you could see new perspectives, and it's life-changing stuff.
I think an easy misconception here, oftentimes we hear some of the horror stories from women about guys just getting off and then they're done and they're leaving, and there's this whole thing called the orgasm gap where the guys come and the women don't, and there's a huge number difference between that. That's all true. That all exists. That's all in reality. There's another category that I was in for a long time, which was like making sure I was doing the pleasing, making sure I was doing it right. I remember taking a lot of pride in, okay, like I know how to make women, general, come. Like, yes, I'm going to do my thing. It was almost like a software program that was written with not a lot of variables. It was just like step 1, step 2, step 3, you come. And my identity was, so not only was it wrapped up in like me and myself, but also in the performing, in the doing. And it took a couple amazing women who were very generous with their feedback to say like, hey, like I can't actually feel you right now. Like you're not actually here. Like I don't know what you're doing, right? But like,
what do you mean?
It's not
this
working
works
for
every
me.
time. What do you mean?
Yes,
Right.
yes.
We're on step 2. We're getting to step 3. This is where you get the part where you come.
Right.
Right. And so I think when we talk about connection, I think oftentimes we can misconstrue connection to actually still performing, but performing for someone else instead of performing for self.
That's a big one. So we've had some of these really powerful conversations with women who are like I come up against these dudes who need to make me orgasm. Like it's clearly not about them wanting to deliver me pleasure. It's clearly about feeding their ego. And it becomes like this pressure thing. It's why haven't you come yet? And like they just keep trying harder. And that is below the line. You know what I mean? Below the line behavior that we like to talk about. And above the line is like connection. This is about us. Like we're here for mutual benefit and a genuine desire to please the other person. But that below the line where you're like, I just want you to come so I can have another notch in my belt. I know I've been there at some point in time, just kind of like how you talked about, Brian. It was about, I made you come. And I think like an adult way of looking at that is like, we did this together. Like we did this together. There's obviously, she needs to know herself and her body and what she enjoys. And then we need to be in tune with that stuff as well. And then mutually we've gone on this dance together and we both enjoyed it. But there are a lot of guys who are under this misconception of like, you made her do that.
Right. You made her do that. And there's a lot of pressure that comes with that to get it right and to already know. And when we already know, or we're supposed to already know, we think we're supposed to know, we stop asking questions because that means we don't know. And so the encouragement for any guys that have gone through something like this or currently going through is like, ask. Nothing. I promise you're not going to blow up. I promise you that the reaction that you get from a woman isn't going to be like, you don't know how to do this. They will thank you for actually asking the question. And it's a lot more fun that way because you don't have to have all the answers.
Right. I'd love to hear from women how important orgasm is, because as a guy, it's kind of like, I don't want to say necessary, but like, at the end, I want it to be part of the act 100% of the time, Does a woman need orgasm to be part of the act 100% of the time to enjoy? Can she just go and then like, that was fun and now let's stop and I didn't orgasm, but I'm still fully satisfied,
Before I answer that question, like the thing that I want to address is I used to be the guy who needed 100%, like an orgasm 100% of the time too, where it was like, and I became consumed with that outcome. There's no judgment that that's like what you want. There's no judgment there, right? I want to be very clear about that. But I've also found that limited a lot of my sexual experiences where like it had to end up in the same destination every single time. And because for me, a big part of it is like when I take that off the table, then what's possible? And many times it's many longer sexual experiences, slower paces or differing paces, maybe being able to have sex for 3 or 4 hours in a given day, not all at once, but like over the course of time because I've retained that energy. And also like how that retention of that life force staying inside of me over periods of time shows up in my life. Now, I know you and I have had conversations with this, Keith, where you're like, I've done semen retention and I don't feel like that big of a difference. And for me, and David Data says this, I think, quite well in his book called The Enlightened Sex Manual, it's subtle as fuck. And it's real. Like when I retain my energy and my semen and my ejaculation is really the way of putting it. You can still orgasm without ejaculating. It's a spiritual thing. So like I feel my heart open more. I feel I'm much more in tune with my creativity. I'm less caught up in the mundane, rote aspects of my life and much more like I'm able to step into gratitude. It's subtle as fuck. And it was also a thing that like during an 11-month period where I wasn't ejaculating at all, where I felt so much life force that I decided to leave my 15-year corporate career and then create a business. I've been to some of these extremes where like I've experienced some of that stuff and only started with withholding that need to ejaculate every single time.
Let me ask a silly question here. So Dominic, let's say you're having sex or you're being intimate with a partner and there's no indicator. Like usually, like Keith, to your point, like there's an indicator of when it's over. So when you come or maybe when you both come, it's over. If neither of you are, when do you stop? Like, is there like a natural breaking point other than an orgasm?
Yes. It's really the energy of the situation. I mean, let's just say you're not coming as a guy or you're not ejaculating as a man and she is. One of the things that I found that my partners have absolutely loved and appreciated and very rarely get a chance to experience is after their orgasm that they just get to stop and relish in that orgasm and to like let it like linger in their bodies where they don't have to then move on to making me come or blowing me or doing some other sexual act. Like I can just hold them. And so many of them have been conditioned to like orgasming, enjoying it for like 5 milliseconds and then like just out of habit, getting back into the act. And like, I just stop them and I hold them. I'm like, no, you know what? We're done. Like, let's just breathe into that. Let's let your body feel that. And for them, they've been able to feel their orgasm at a much deeper level and really appreciate that.
I love that.
This is in the advanced course. This is good material right here. You don't get this from your buddies in 8th grade.
Right. It goes along with just taking, focus off of genital penetration and onto connecting with the person and where they're at, what feels good. Again, we're talking from that transition of, being a teenager to being a grown adult to a different way of making that connection. It's subtle, but I don't know. It doesn't happen on its own. It takes like these kind of conversations with your buddies to even know what's possible. We can't all reinvent the wheel individually on our own for everything. You got to share, you got to talk.
And here's one more thing I'll say about like when orgasm needs to be a requirement. Then if you don't orgasm, then that sexual experience has occurred on some level as a failure or unfulfilling at the very least. It could be anywhere from unfulfilling to a failure if like an orgasm is not achieved either by you or your partner, and it dismisses all of the like amazing sexual feelings that led up to it. Also, like here's an example of something that I would like to practice with another partner is like women can have 3 different types of orgasms. It's the clitoral orgasm, the vaginal orgasm, the cervical orgasm. The frequency with which those happen are kind of like clitoral are the most common, vaginal is the second common, cervical is the least common. Clitoral orgasms are often described as very similar to like what we as guys experience, right? Kind of like an intense feeling that's short-lived and there's a depletion of energy after it's over in most cases. Vaginal is something like G-spot. It's usually like a couple of inches inside of the vagina that takes longer to stimulate. And it's a much more like full body experience, can also be like spiritual. Cervical oftentimes for many women is kind of like one of those transcendent experiences, where they feel fucked open to God, something beyond the physical realm. And many times that can take even longer. They say 45 to 60 minutes. Now, if I wanted to be with a partner and help her to explore some of those vaginal or cervical orgasms, which oftentimes happens with like fingers or toys, there may be a likelihood that after I'm like fingering in a certain spot for 20 or 30 minutes, that I'm not going to be hard.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? And like,
Sure.
And so to actually be able to communicate that and then to just be like, this is just going to be about you. And then to hold that space, and it may not create an orgasm that first time or second time, or even after like a week or 2 of doing this. But if we were able to like transcend that and then to go beyond that, then all of a sudden now she's experiencing vaginal orgasms or cervical orgasms where she's feeling connected to God and whatever the fuck realm she's traveling to, she could eventually take me to also. That's not going to happen if I'm only doing penetrative, I need to orgasm sex every single time.
When this podcast's over, I'm immediately Googling cervical orgasm and how to do it. I've never heard of this. I want to know all about it. I want to be involved in it. And now I have like a new to-do list.
I can just see the conversation with your wife right now. This is going to be, please let us know how that goes.
I'll link the Enlightened Sex Manual by David Deida. The first like 20 pages or so are a little bit like head spinning. Mm. If you can stick with it, then it gets to some of these awesome conversations about ejaculation and also about clitoral, vaginal, and cervical orgasms. Guys, I mean, there's so many fucking realms of sexuality. I mean, look, like we're in our early to mid 40s and we're just waking the fuck up to this stuff, right? Like if guys who's 20 listen to this.
And I know we started this conversation today around sexual performance and dick sizes and everything else. And I'm glad that the conversation has transitioned to this realm of what can it be? And also that not many people are talking about from like that spiritual level. It's a fun, interesting journey. I've described it like this. You know that I like cookies, but most guys, like what they know is that they can do a chocolate chip cookie. They know what an orgasm looks like and everything else. But the good news is they can get a box with all different types of cookies. You can always go back to the chocolate chip, and you get some peanut butter and some macadamia and some sprinkles and some some caramel even in there. Like there's a lot of different facets to what a guy can experience. And we're just starting to talk about some of those now, which is exciting because what got boring for me in sex with previous, like many previous partners is the same chocolate chip cookie over and over and over and over again. And eventually even the chocolate chip cookie got kind of boring. And so my relationships, sexually wise, like when they get hit that like 6 to 8 month mark, I was like, I'm not feeling the spark anymore. And I thought that was their fault. And it turns out it's because I've just been doing the same damn thing over and over again. So like this variety, like when we talk about the spiritual aspect of sex, it may sound woo, but it's a ton of fun. And so my encouragement is to like be open to exploring some of this stuff. And I'm giving advice to myself right now. Like I don't have to have all the answers. We can go in and we can explore and do together.
It's a travesty if a chocolate chip cookie ever becomes boring. Right? And it's a travesty if sex ever becomes like it's totally on you. So Keith, if you listen to the show enough, like you'll know that everything always comes back to Brian making an analogy about cookies on some level, because that's how he makes sense of the world.
I'm with you, dude. Chocolate chip cookies all day. All day. It's my favorite.
All right, gentlemen, it is now time to take action. What is the one insight? What is the one aha? What is the one action step that you are going to be taking from this conversation around sexual performance, dick size, withholding ejaculation that you learned about from this conversation with Brian, Keith, and I? If you would like to boldly share this in the Facebook group for men, you can head over to the Great Man Within Podcast Facebook group, linked in the show notes. And then finally, one more reminder. If you are interested in making the inner work and becoming the best version of yourself over the next 12 months, a number one priority in your life, then we are currently having conversations about the Great Man Mastermind 2.0. We are going to be having a class of maximum of 20 men who are going to be going on this journey together. And if you're interested to make your interest known, then email me at hello@DominicQ.com, also in the show notes, and we'll get you set up for an exploratory conversation.